So what can someone expect if they're going in for a QEEG? Why is this important? Why would you want to do it? What benefits does it have over other types of neurofeedback? What are the different types of neurofeedback? I am going to be going over so much information in such a short period of time, so stay tuned. I'm going to be talking really, really fast. You might have to slow it down. Just kidding. I'm not going to talk really fast. Okay, so QEEG. This is getting an EEG, eyes open, eyes closed. We send it into a database, and we can then compare someone's brainwaves to the statistical norm and see what is outside the norm and if that correlates with their symptoms. So if someone has ADHD, the theta to beta ratio is off more than 2 standard deviations. Interesting, yeah. Theta to beta ratio training was likely going to help that person with their ADHD. So this does 2 things. We can tell if someone is a good candidate for neurofeedback based off their brainwaves. If everything is inside the norm, that really might not be the source of an issue. Could neurofeedback still help? Yeah, it could. But it might not be like clinical at that point. You're just kind of peak performance training. You're just trying to help just a little bit, but you're not really, that might not be the source of someone's symptom. Whereas if something comes back and yeah, it's really statistically outside the norm, it's more likely that neurofeedback is going to create more of a noticeable change and just feeling better. So what this does is it's used for screening, but also tailoring specific protocols to an individual. So if we do recording, we get brainwaves back, we get 400 pages of data, we comb through that, we say this is what's going on, we know what then to treat. We know what areas of the brain are outside the norm, what areas of the brain are correlating with their symptoms. We can target that. Or not necessarily me, but a neurofeedback practitioner can target that. And then even how they target it. So there's standardized protocols, which sometimes it's done without a QEEG. So why QEEG is important? Let's say someone goes in, they're like, I have addiction problems, and they're like, oh, we're gonna do alpha theta training. But that person has too much alpha and they have too much theta already because they have ADHD, and you're training that up, you might not get the desired results. You actually want to know what's going on before you kind of head off in a certain direction. If someone has too much theta, and that might not be a good thing. If someone has too much alpha and you train that up, that might not be a good thing. So the standardized protocols in some instances may not be a good idea. So doing a QEEG, even if someone is doing a standardized protocol, is smart, because then we know if the standardized protocol is even going to help. But then also there's specific protocols for that individual. So say instead of like the standardized protocol right here, beta SMR for example, maybe it's more in the frontal lobe. Maybe it's theta to beta ratio training right here. And that can be observed in a QEEG. Specific protocols can be used. And even then, the specific protocols, there's different types of protocols. Let's say there's classical neurofeedback. We're going to train the theta wave down. Or we're going to train the theta wave down and the beta wave up, so you're less distracted and more alert. There's that. Even with the different types, we're going to do bipolar montage. We're going to do a couple spots, but we're going to treat it as one. Or we're going to do a monopolar montage. Then there's even different things to go in there. Yeah. That's one type. There's a classical, there's things like the Othmer method, but then there's things like Zscore Training, which is taking a bunch of brainwaves and saying everything within this window, if you get a bunch within this window, we're giving you a reward. So it's measuring multiple things at once and say 65% get within this range, oh, you're getting a reward. So it's training multiple things so people learn to regulate their brainwaves with lots of things all at once, not just something in a direction, but multiple things at once. That's another type of neurofeedback, is Z-score training. But then there's how one part of the brain is communicating with another part of the brain and increasing that communication or decreasing that communication, or the timing of that communication. So there's coherence, there's relative power, there's phase, which is timing. Coherence is that communication. Relative is typically, it's not done on its own. To be honest, you want to kind of avoid doing relative Z-score training on its own. And then there's most of the Z-score training is just absolute power, but you can also include all these other things, and that's all still within the umbrella of Z-score training. And then there's even 19 channel Z-score training, the full cap. There is not just 19 channel, but there's Sloretta, or Loretta, SW Loretta, targeting what's happening on the inside of the brain, the limbic lobe. And you can do Z-score training with a specific area, or you can take that specific area and you can do directional training with it. And you can say, okay, the limbic lobe, we're going to do this. We're going to train this brainwave in this direction. So there's Loretta, there's Z-score, there's classical, there's training with absolute power, coherence, theta or ratio training, like theta to beta ratio. There's a lot of different types of neurofeedback. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm going to say, is there's a lot of different types, and it's really, really fascinating to see what can be done. So let's take an example where someone has too much theta wave, but their right and left hemisphere isn't really communicating that well. You could actually do Sloretta communication from one part of the brain to another. You can do Sloretta coherence directional training and train the brain to be communicating between the two hemispheres more, while training the theta wave down. There's a lot of really, really cool, intricate, fascinating things that you can do with neurofeedback. But there's a vast array, and I'm going through it, and I almost forgot asymmetry training, something that can be done with Z-score training. There's quite a bit, but going back to the beginning, the QEEG, that lets us know. That lets us know what's going on. That lets us know what protocols are available, despite whatever approach is being used, whether it's Loretta, Z-score, classical, standardized protocols, or specific protocols, QEEG-based protocols. Lets you know if you're a good candidate for neurofeedback. Because if you have a certain symptoms and you get this mapped back, but everything associated with your symptoms is in this normal range, your symptoms may likely be caused by something else. Maybe someone has sleep apnea. That's going to contribute to symptoms that neurofeedback wouldn't do anything for. So a huge part in mental health, neurofeedback in general, is finding the source of an issue, finding the source of a symptom. If someone has had symptoms their entire life, neurofeedback may be a really good option. If there was a sudden onset of symptoms, maybe something like EMDR. But then again, also sometimes neurofeedback for that, depending like what type of thing it was. And what those symptoms are. So there's a lot of different options, a lot of different types of neurofeedback, a lot of different types of biofeedback. There's even biofeedback that's integrated with neurofeedback. Light therapy can be used to kind of encourage brainwaves to go in certain directions. It's a lot. It is quite a bit to learn. But that's essentially the gist of it, and I am still skipping out on so much information. I will put more out there that will explain each of these steps in more detail. Thank you for your time.